and welcome to Assembly Audible. I'm your host, Jennifer Pierce, multimedia content specialist with Assembly Magazine. One of the biggest issues in manufacturing today is that companies can't find workers. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, U.S. manufacturers had 858,000 unfilled jobs in November 2021. Today, we're joined by Dr. Roberta Rayner Everson, an associate professor of social policy and practice at the University of Pennsylvania. She is also the author of the new book, What Workers Say: Decades of Struggle and How to Make Real Opportunity Now, which is coming out this month. For the book, Professor Everson interviewed more than 1,200 workers to present stories about their jobs since 1980. She puts a human face on the experiences of a broad range of workers, indicating what their jobs were and are truly like. Professor Everson, welcome to Assembly Audible.
Thank you very much.
I cannot wait to hear your perspective about this. Your book challenges the cherished American ideal that hard work pays off. Would you mind to talk about that a little bit?
What I try to show is from both in this book and in my previous book is that the notion that hard work pays off is a myth. It's a myth that's based on an old view of the relationship between workers and firms. And this old paradigm, the old labor market, actually, that Studs Terkel's epic book, Working, describes up until around 1970, assumed that if workers work hard, managers and bosses will reciprocate in kind. But this myth assumed that firms were organized according to career ladders that enable workers to steadily move up in job opportunity and earnings. But for the most part, these earlier labor markets don't function that way anymore. There's been globalization and downsizing and outsourcing and flexible work and flexible managerial arrangements. And most of those help firms much more than they help workers. And the myth implies that if somebody works hard, their income will increase in parallel. This is a pattern which for many decades provided the core of what we call economic mobility. But research, including mine from the 1980s and still today, suggests that this upward ladder isn't present in most firms anymore. That wage growth is likely to be more lateral than vertical, and that these changing wage patterns pertain to many, many different kinds of jobs, but are strongly seen in manufacturing.
So, more than 60% of Assembly's readers are in manufacturing management positions. What don't they know about their workers and how those workers perceive their jobs?
Yeah. They really don't, many of them don't factor in that workers who have partners and children are pulled like puppets, from early morning to late at night, sometimes overnight. Some families in my research certainly have developed sort of what I call piggyback work schedules. So one works all night and is available so that parent can be home during the day for a sick child. And the other one works during the day, but is home at night for homework and getting the kids to sleep. This doesn't leave very much time for sleep for anybody, certainly of anybody of the grown-ups. And the other real problem that's embedded in that is that manufacturers and most other workplaces these days do not offer much in the way of on-the-job training, which means that they have to find that if somebody wants to get additional training, some worker, they have to do it on their own time outside of the job. They might not have to pay for it, but they pay by the time that it takes from them or their families. So that's a big issue that I think many of the older workers in manufacturing firms and other kinds of workplaces don't really take into consideration. Here's another thing that what manufacturing management position some people maybe don't know. Things like this mentoring program that Tisha, worked on and developed. Actually, it reduces turnover. They did studies of it. It reduced costly turnover for the manufacturer. Not only did we interview families and individuals, we interviewed their families. We went to schools. We went to workplaces. We spent time in their workplaces. We interviewed their supervisors in all these different arenas. I mean, there were 10,000 pages of data. So I think also what other things that oftentimes manufacturing management positions didn't seem to understand about, or I don't want to say understand, but didn't really think about too much, was that these new forms of relational employment groups sometimes were either covertly or overtly developed by upper management to avoid unionization. Sometimes the employees were not necessarily aware of that, and sometimes they were very aware of that. But just-in-time scheduling, of course, as we all know, has terrible influence on people with small children who have childcare issues. One of the other things that I have found really throughout the years in my research is that the offering of non-wage benefits, health insurance, and other various benefits is quite variable. And sometimes if the cost is too high, I think earlier on, certainly if it's over $15, a pay period, like for healthcare, and so much of that, of course, was pre-Obamacare, but still, the employee wouldn't opt to do it.
Okay, so based on what you learned from your interviews, why can't manufacturers find workers and how can they address the issue?
And there's been quite a bit of interesting research on this too, is to shorten the hours and keep the same pay. Shorten the work week. Many of the European countries and some areas of the United States are shortening work weeks to 4-day work weeks, not extending the hours, and and allowing the same pay and the same benefits.
Right. Quality over quantity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's certainly one thing. One of the other sort of dilemmas that it would be pretty hard for manufacturers themselves to actually solve, but it's a problem, is that in many manufacturing jobs, some amount of math capability is necessary, as well as in printing and a few other sort of lower wage job areas. But in manufacturing, one of the things I found was that the youth in these various training programs that I knew about and had observed and researched, the youth couldn't pass the math test that the apprentice for an apprenticeship, for example, an apprentice position. They couldn't pass it because they hadn't had enough good math in their high schools and lower income parts of cities.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So that maybe if manufacturers want to invest a little bit more in pre-training, which they have done in certain of the big initiatives. The Annie E. Casey Foundation Jobs Initiative was a big one, and that a lot of the research in this book still comes from that. And that, but even those folks, the workers, the would-be workers that were participating in those trainings weren't getting enough math to pass the apprenticeship test. And that's going to also pertain to immigrants and to refugees who don't have the language or the test-taking capabilities or understanding of how our standardized tests work. And that was another real dilemma.
What do you think a common response is to your work? Do you think people would say something along the lines of like, well, what about productivity? We have numbers and goals we have to meet. And, they might think that this approach isn't feasible?
Mhm. Well, I think there's a lot of research that would say it's very feasible. That in fact, when workers feel it's important what they're doing, that what their work activities are, that they are a source of pride and they're a source of, they make a difference. And if, when measured, and there have been quite a number of research projects that have been measuring productivity. Productivity is very high, and it's higher when workers are really viewed as people, multifaceted people.
Well, thank you so much. This was fascinating for me, and I really appreciate your time. Where can people get a copy of your book?
It's on Amazon, and it will be out officially on the 17th of
Okay.
June.
For more insights on assembling discrete parts into finished products and the people behind it all, visit our website, assemblymag.com, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast to keep up with our latest episodes. We're also on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, so we invite you to follow us there too. This has been Assembly Audible. Thanks for listening.